All right, so you know how it is sometimes. You get interested in something new, you want to learn, but wow, there's just so much information out there.
Right. It can be really overwhelming to even know where to start.
Totally. And that's why we do what we do here on the Deep Dive.
Yeah, we dive in, so to speak, sift through the sources and
Mm.
pull out the most interesting, the most important bits, so you don't have to.
Exactly. A shortcut to knowledge. And today, well, today we're saddling up, getting ready to learn about a breed of horse that has always captivated people's imaginations, the Andalusian.
Ah, the Andalusian, or, as they say in its native Spain, the PRE,
PRE.
Pura Raza Española.
Of course, pure Spanish breed. I should have known that.
No worries. But yeah, a breed with a long, long history and a certain, I don't know, a mystique.
Definitely a mystique. And our main source for this deep dive is going to be the Wikipedia entry on the Andalusian horse. And like we always do, we'll go through it, pull out the good stuff, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to impress your friends with your Andalusian horse knowledge.
That's the goal. I mean, you hear Andalusian horse, and right away you think of Spain, right? You think of like flamenco dancers or brave bullfighters on horseback.
Totally. So striking. So let's get into it. What are the key things, the key characteristics that make an Andalusian an Andalusian?
First off, they're beautiful horses.
That they are.
They have this really unique blend of power and elegance,
Okay.
strongly built, compact, and they always have these long, thick manes and tails. Really flowing.
Yeah, that mane is definitely something else. It's like their trademark. And speaking of trademarks, I feel like most of the Andalusians I've seen are gray, like a really light, almost white gray. Is that typical?
It is actually, especially in the U.S. Like something like 80% of Andalusians you'll see here are gray, but they actually come in a range of colors like bay, black, palomino, chestnut, even a striking cremello.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. So there's more to them than just that classic gray.
Okay.
And size-wise, are we talking like massive war horse or something more nimble?
They're sort of right in the middle. Stallions and geldings, the males, typically stand around 15.1 hands high.
Okay, quick side note. For those of us who don't spend all our time around horses, what's a hand again?
Oh, right. Good point. A hand is 4 inches. So
Huh.
15.1 hands is about 61.5 inches tall or 156 centimeters.
Okay, got it.
And they weigh, on average, around 11,129 pounds. Mares, the females, are a bit smaller, more like 15 hands even, so about 60.5 inches or 154 centimeters. And they weigh around 908 pounds.
So not tiny horses by any means, but not like massive draft horses either.
Exactly. And actually, the Spanish government even has, like, official minimum height requirements for Andalusians to be registered. 15 hands for males and 14.3 hands for females. It really shows you how important the breed is to them.
Wow, they even regulate the size.
Yeah.
Okay, so aside from size, what else defines the Andalusian build? What should we be looking for?
Well, they generally have a straight or slightly convex facial profile, not like a super Roman nose or a really dished face like you see in some breeds. In fact, those extreme profiles are kind of frowned upon in the show world. Then you have this beautiful, long, broad neck, well-defined withers, a deep, massive chest, and kind of in contrast, a relatively short back.
Interesting. Short back, long neck.
Yeah, and then broad, powerful hindquarters. So they're not just pretty, they're strong, too. They also tend to have what they call clean legs, not a lot of that long hair around the fetlocks. And they're really known for their energetic, graceful gaits.
Energetic gaits makes you think they might be, high strung, like that classic image of a fiery Spanish horse. What's their temperament actually like?
That's actually a common misconception. They are intelligent and sensitive, for sure, but they're also famous for being docile. The Wikipedia article really emphasizes that they're quick learners, they're very responsive, and they're really cooperative, especially if they're treated with respect, obviously.
That's great to hear. A horse that's both beautiful and easy to work with. Now, something that really caught my eye in the article was the mention of a specific type of Andalusian called the Carthusian strain.
It sounds really special.
Yeah, the Carthusians. They're really interesting. They're often considered the purest strain of Andalusian, with some of the oldest recorded pedigrees going way back, and historically they were very sought after, like they could command much higher prices.
Wow, so like the elite Andalusians. So what makes them so special? Is there something that physically sets them apart from other Andalusians?
That's where it gets tricky. Because while breeders have long considered them distinct, a genetic study from 2005 actually didn't find much evidence to support a clear separation from other Andalusians, so genetically they might not be that different. But there are a few traits that are often associated with Carthusians. Like they tend to have these small warts under their tails, which are thought to trace back to a foundation stallion named Esclavo.
Warts under the tail, that's specific.
Right. And then there's also this other even weirder thing. Frontal bosses. Frontal bosses. Like what? Like a boss in their forehead?
Kind of. They're these bony protuberances that sometimes develop on their foreheads. Some people even call them horns.
Hold on, horns. Like actual horns, like a bull.
Not quite like that. More like little bumps or sometimes more noticeable growths near their ears. It's not fully clear how common they are or even if they're directly related to Esclavo's lineage, like the tail warts. But they're definitely a curious feature.
So it's like this specific family within the breed developed its own set of quirks. That's fascinating. And the article also mentioned how, in the past, people will look at the markings on an Andalusian's coat and think they meant something specific about the horse.
Oh yeah, totally. Back in the day, the presence and placement of white markings, like socks on their legs, or even the patterns of the hair whorls, they were thought to be signs of the horse's character, or even omens of good or bad luck.
So, superstition playing a role in horse breeding. I love that. Okay, so back to their physical abilities. The Wikipedia article describes their movement as extended, elevated, cadenced, and harmonious. That sounds, well, very dressage-y.
It is. They're naturally agile, and they have a real knack for learning those really difficult, collected movements you see in advanced dressage. There was even a study that compared their trot to that of Arabians and Anglo-Arabians, and it found that Andalusians have greater flexion in both their front and hind legs, and that contributes to their elevated and graceful gait.
So it's not just about looks. They're built to move in that specific way.
Interesting. But no breed is perfect. The article also mentions a few health issues that Andalusians are prone to.
Right. A 2008 study actually found that they have a higher incidence of certain health problems compared to other breeds, like stallions are more likely to have problems with their small intestine, and they're prone to inguinal hernias.
Inguinal hernias, what's that
Yeah.
exactly? Basically, it's when part of the intestine protrudes through a weak spot in the abdominal wall. It's definitely something to watch out for. But on the flip side, they actually have a lower occurrence of large intestinal obstruction compared to other breeds. And the study also mentioned a potential link between intestinal issues and laminitis, which is a serious hoof condition.
So definitely important things for anyone who owns or breeds Andalusians to be aware of. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk history. The Wikipedia article says that the ancestors of the Andalusian horse have been on the Iberian Peninsula for like a really long time. We're talking tens of thousands of years.
Yeah, it's amazing. There are cave paintings that are like 20,000 to 30,000 years old,
Mhm.
showing horses in that region. It really puts things in perspective. And of course, the Andalusian, as we know it, takes its name from the Andalusia region of Spain.
Right, so a long, long history in that area. And over the centuries, Spain has seen its fair share of different cultures and influences. Did those influences play a role in shaping the Andalusian breed?
Absolutely. The Iberian horse population, which the Andalusian came from, was shaped by interactions with the Celts, the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Germanic tribes, and especially the Moors. It's like a melting pot of equestrian influences.
Yeah.
And get this, as far back as 450 BCE, these horses were already known for being great war horses.
Wow, so they've had a reputation for athleticism and, I guess, bravery for a really long time.
Yeah, for sure. And there's actually a strong link based on mitochondrial DNA to the barb horse of North Africa.
Mitochondrial DNA, refresh my memory.
It's the DNA that's passed down through the mother. So it suggests that there was a lot of intermingling between horses across the Strait of Gibraltar. And some people even think that the Andalusian might be the very first European warm blood.
Warm bloods, meaning they
Were
were
developed by mixing lighter, faster Oriental breeds, like the barbs, with heavier, more powerful European horses. And that blend made them really versatile.
the first warm blood. That's so cool. Now, the article mentions something about the Carthusian monks again. They seem to have played a pretty big role in the story of the Andalusian.
Oh, yeah, they were super important. Starting in the 13th century, they kept some of the earliest written pedigree records in Europe. And in the late 15th century, they started establishing actual Andalusian stud farms connected to their monasteries, especially around Jerez, Seville, and Cazalla.
So not just praying and stuff, they were serious horse breeders, too.
Exactly. And their focus was on breeding really powerful, substantial horses, the kind that would be suitable for the Crown of Castile. They used Spanish genets, as their foundation stock.
Spanish genets.
They're an older, smaller type of Spanish horse, kind of like the ancestors of the Andalusian. And by the 15th century, the Andalusian itself had really become a distinct breed, used not only in war, but also starting to influence other breeds.
Okay, so by that point, the Andalusian was like a big deal, even beyond Spain. And I think there was a quote in the article about what they were called in the 17th century.
Oh yeah, the Duke of Newcastle. In 1667, he called the Spanish horse of Andalusia the princes of the horse world.
Princes of the horse world. I love that. What a compliment. And I bet they were super popular in all the royal courts of Europe.
You bet. They were like the royal horse of Europe. You'd see them all over the place in royal stables, riding academies, you name it. Especially during the 16th century under Charles V and Philip II, Spanish horses were considered the best in the world. And that meant they were really expensive, really hard to get.
So a real status symbol. Owning an Andalusian meant you were someone important. And how did they end up spreading from Spain to other parts of the world?
Well, the Spanish government used them as a tool of diplomacy. They'd give them as gifts to important people or to other royal families, along with permission to export them. And by the 15th century, they were pretty common around the Mediterranean, and even some in Northern Europe, but always, expensive and exclusive.
A horse fit for a king, literally. And what about the Americas? Did they make it over there?
Oh yeah, definitely. The conquistadors, they rode horses that were Spanish in origin. And a lot of those horses trace their ancestry back to the Andalusian type.
So Andalusian bloodlines were part of the whole colonization of the Americas.
Exactly. As early as the 16th century, there were Spanish horses in the Americas. And they played a huge role in the development of a lot of the horse breeds we see in North and South America today. And later on, even more explorers brought them over. By the 17th century, Andalusians had even made it as far as Moldavia.
So their influence really spread far and wide. But I think the article mentioned that they went through a bit of a rough patch in the 19th century. What happened?
Yeah, it's kind of sad. All the Andalusians we see today are actually descended from a pretty small number of horses, mostly ones that were bred by religious orders in the 18th and 19th centuries. And then the 19th century itself was tough on them. All the wars, like the War of the Oranges, the Peninsular War, the Carlist Wars, lots of horses were lost, stolen, or taken by armies.
A lot of upheaval.
Yeah. And then Napoleon's invasion didn't help either. And on top of that, there was a really bad epidemic in 1832. It wiped out a huge number of Andalusians. Only one herd survived.
Wow, that's awful. And at the same time, were people just becoming less interested in them?
In a way, yeah. European breeders were starting to focus on thoroughbreds and different warm-blood breeds, horses for racing and sport.
So the Andalusian was sort of falling out of fashion, but they did eventually recover, right?
It did, but it was slow. The Seville Horse Fair in 1869 had a lot of Spanish horses, but in the early 20th century, the focus in Spain was more on draft breeds, Arabians, and thoroughbreds. Andalusians weren't as popular, plus Spain didn't allow the export of horses until 1962.
So they were kind of isolated for a while.
Yeah. But once those restrictions were lifted, they slowly started to regain popularity around the world. They were first brought to Australia in 1971, and that led to the Andalusian Horse Association of Australasia being formed in 1973. And today, the U.S. has a population of around 8,500 Andalusians. And the International Andalusian and Lusitano Horse Association, the IALA, they register about 700 new foals every year.
So they made a comeback. That's great. Now, earlier we talked about the Carthusian strain. Are there any other, subtypes or strains within the Andalusian breed that are important to know about?
Well, the Carthusian is definitely the one you hear about the most. It's got that whole reputation for purity. But it's really important to remember it's a strain within the breed, not a separate breed entirely. And even though there isn't strong genetic evidence to back it up, Carthusians are often described as having a slightly more oriental or concave head and being mostly gray.
Okay, so subtle differences.
Right. And non-Carthusians, they can have a more convex head and come in more colors. But anyway, the Carthusian line mostly goes back to the early 18th century. Two brothers, the Zamoras, they were big breeders, and they had this stallion, El Soldado, who was really important. The mares they used for breeding came from the royal stud farm at Aranjuez. And then the Carthusian monks, they were the ones who really kept this line going. They even resisted attempts by the royalty to introduce other bloodlines, although they did add a bit of Arabian and Barb blood to refine certain traits. And then, during the Peninsular Wars, this strain almost disappeared entirely. But it was saved by a family called the Zapatas. And today, Carthusians are still super prized.
It's amazing the lengths people go to preserve these bloodlines. Okay, so with such a long history and all this spreading around the world, the Andalusian must have had a big influence on other horse breeds, right?
Oh, absolutely. Huge influence. Because Spain was so involved in wars and stuff, and because they had this tradition of their soldiers riding stallions, Andalusian blood got spread all over Europe. Like they'd breed Spanish stallions to local mares. And that's why breeds like the Neapolitan, the Groningen, the Lepensiner, and the Kladruber, they're all pretty closely related to the Andalusian. It's all thanks to the Habsburg dynasty, who ruled both Spain and parts of Europe.
Just like a family tree of horses.
Totally. And they also had a big impact on German warmbloods like the Hanoverian and the Holstein, and also Dutch and Danish breeds like the Frisian and the Fredericksborg. And in the Americas, they played a big role in creating the ultra-real strain of the Lusitano and the Azteca breed in Mexico. And even the Spanish genets, remember those ancestors of the Andalusian? Well, they were the basis for the colonial Spanish horse in America. And even today, they're still being used to create new breeds, like the Warlander, which is a cross between an Andalusian and a Frisian, and the Spanish Norman, which is a cross with a Percheron.
Wow, so they're like the granddaddy of so many breeds. A real cornerstone of like horse breeding history. Okay, now let's talk about names, because I'm a bit confused. Is it an Andalusian? Is it a PRE? What's the deal?
Yeah, it can be a bit confusing. So, historically, horse breeds were often named after the region they came from. That's why we have the Andalusian. But over time, they've been called a bunch of different things. Iberian saddle horse, Spanish horse, even genet. And Carthusian, remember, that's a strain, not a separate breed.
Oh, right.
And then there's the nickname Horse of Kings, which is pretty fitting, really. And then there's the whole Lusitano thing. Some people say that Andalusians and Lusitanos are basically the same breed genetically. The main difference is where they're registered. And the registration process itself, that can be a bit of a headache. You've got the IALA, the ANCCE, the Australasia Andalusian Association, each with their own rules and definitions.
So it's not just one big happy family.
Got it. Now, what about this term PRE? What's that all about? So PRE stands for Pura Raza Española,
Right.
which basically means pure Spanish horse. And ANCCE, which is the National Association of Purebred Spanish Horse Breeders of Spain, they use this term, PRE, exclusively. They say that only they have the authority to register and document PRE horses.
So they're kind of the gatekeepers.
Exactly. And they're pretty strict about it. They say that the terms Andalusian and Iberian horse should only be used for horses that aren't officially registered as PREs. But in other parts of the world, like in Australia, they use Andalusian and PRE pretty much interchangeably.
Okay, so there's some disagreement there.
There is. And there's even another PRE registry called PRE Mundial. They claim that they go back to the original stud book that was kept by the Cría Caballar, which used to be a government agency in Spain. And actually, there's been some legal drama about this whole registry thing. As of 2011, there was a lawsuit going on about who actually owns the rights to the PRE stud book.
Wow, so it's getting really complicated.
It is. The UCCE, which represents Spanish horse breeders, they argued that the transfer of the stud book from the Cría Caballar to ANCCE, which is a private organization, was illegal. And in 2009, the court actually sided with them. But then in 2011, the Spanish government just went ahead and said that ANCCE was still the official registry. It's a whole mess.
Wow, so much drama. Okay, let's wrap things up by talking about what Andalusians are actually used for. Because, they're more than just pretty faces.
Oh, absolutely. Throughout history, they've been valued for their athleticism and versatility. Like, there are accounts from the 17th century that talk about how incredibly fast they were in races. And in the 19th and 20th centuries, the military had specific standards for their endurance and speed.
So they were the real deal.
Oh, yeah. And from the very beginning, they were used for both riding and driving. And they were some of the very first horses used for classical dressage. They still compete at the highest levels today in the Olympics and the World Equestrian Games.
Wow, so they've got brains and athleticism.
Definitely. And more, they're being bred specifically for dressage. But historically, they were also really important as working ranch horses, especially with the Iberian bulls. And they were, and still are, used in mounted bullfighting.
So brave horses.
They are. And get this, mares, the females, were even used for threshing grain up until the 1960s. It's called la trilla in Spanish.
Wow, so they were truly multi-purpose.
Totally. And today, they're still versatile. You'll see them in show jumping, Western pleasure, all sorts of disciplines.
And didn't you say they were even a mascot?
That's right. Traveler, the mascot of the University of Southern California, is an Andalusian. And they're popular in movies, too, like Gladiator, Lord of the Rings, all those big historical and fantasy epics. And there's even a giant bronze statue of a rearing Andalusian in El Paso, Texas.
From war horses to movie stars to college mascots, that's quite a resume. So to sum up, the Andalusian horse has an incredibly long and interesting history. They've been war horses, royal horses, and everything in between. They're strong but elegant, intelligent but gentle. And they're amazing movers with a natural talent for dressage. And even though their names and registration can be a bit confusing, there's no doubt that they've had a huge impact on horse breeds all over the world.
Exactly. A true legacy breed. Strength, elegance, intelligence, sensitivity, it's all there. A real testament to centuries of careful breeding.
It's been a real pleasure taking this deep dive into the world of the Andalusian horse. So much to learn.
And as we wrap up, here's a thought for you, our listener. With all this history and with all the ongoing debates about their future and how they're defined, what do you think will happen to the Andalusian? How will this prince of the horse world continue to evolve and capture our imaginations? It's a question worth thinking about.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, and until our next deep dive, keep exploring and keep learning. So we often rely on later copies from the old Babylonian period of what are believed to be his original inscriptions.
Now, Akkad itself is so closely tied to Sargon's name. Was he actually the one who founded this important city?
That's a really interesting point of debate, actually. The traditional understanding was that, yes, Sargon established Akkad and made it his capital. However, the discovery of an inscription that mentions Akkad and dates to the reign of Inshakushana, who likely lived before Sargon.
Oh.
Yeah, that throws it into question. It seems Akkad was already a place of some significance before Sargon rose to power, so his achievement might have been in elevating Akkad to imperial prominence rather than founding it outright.
That nuance is important. It shifts our perspective slightly on his role. And what about another famous city, Babylon? The article mentions a connection between Sargon and Babylon.
Yes, both the Widener Chronicle and the Chronicle of Early Kings state that relatively late in his reign, Sargon either built Babylon in front of Akkad or created a counterpart of Babylon next to Agad, which is another name for Akkad.
Right.
However, some scholars, as the article notes, believe these later chronicles might actually be referring to the Neo-Assyrian king Sargon II, who lived much later, rather than our Sargon of Akkad. It's a reminder that historical figures with the same name can sometimes get conflated in later retellings.
So, despite a potentially lengthy and impactful reign, the contemporary records that are precisely dated are relatively few.
That's correct. We currently only have definitive regnal year names for 4 specific years of his rule. These names commemorate significant military campaigns against regions like Elam, Mari, Simurum, and Uru Arawa, which was located in western Elam.
Okay.
These brief glimpses into his activities underscore the importance of these regions to his power and influence.
Okay, so these year names give us hints of his military focus. Let's dive deeper into what we know about his conquests. What do the historical accounts tell us about his ambition to expand his territory?
Well, one of the most valuable sources for understanding Sargon's conquests is the Nippur inscription. Although we only have fragments of it, this tablet dates back to the Old Babylonian period and is believed to be a copy of inscriptions that were originally on a statue pedestal dedicated by Sargon in the temple of Enlil, a major deity.
And what kind of titles did Sargon use in this inscription that can often reveal a ruler's self-perception and, claims to authority?
He certainly wasn't shy about his status. He styles himself as Sargon, king of Akkad, overseer, Mashkim of Inanna, king of Kish, anointed Gouda of Anu, king of the land Mesopotamia, governor Ensi of Enlil.
Wow, quite a list.
Yeah, these titles link him to major Mesopotamian gods and important cities like Kish, suggesting he saw himself as divinely sanctioned and holding dominion over a significant area.
And what specific military victories did he highlight in this inscription regarding Sumer itself?
The inscription prominently celebrates his conquest of Uruk and his defeat of Lugal-Zajci. It states that Sargon defeated the city of Uruk and tore down its walls, a clear sign of subjugation. Even more dramatically, it recounts how he captured Lugal-Zajci in battle and led him in a collar to the gate of Enlil. That image really drives home the completeness of Sargon's victory and the symbolic humbling of his rival.
That's a powerful and brutal image, isn't it?
Yeah.
Leading a defeated king in a collar.
Yeah.
It leaves a lasting impression of Sargon's dominance.
Yeah.
And his ambitions clearly extended beyond just Uruk and Kish, didn't they?
Absolutely. The inscription goes on to describe his military actions against and Enanmar, stating that he laid waste to the territory stretching from Lagash all the way to the sea, indicating a significant campaign in southern Mesopotamia.
Uh-huh.
Following this, he turned his attention to Umma, where he was also victorious and destroyed its walls. The inscription boasts that the god Enlil granted him no rival and gave him control over the Upper Sea, which we understand to be the Mediterranean,
Okay.
and the Lower Sea, the Persian Gulf. This claim signifies a truly expansive vision of his rule.
So he's already claiming control over a vast geographical area, connecting the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf. But the inscription also details his expansion into regions beyond Sumer, particularly towards the Mediterranean, right?
Yes, by aligning himself with Dagon, a major deity in the Levant, Sargon extended his influence into Upper Mesopotamia and the Levant. He conquered important centers like Murray, Yarmuti, possibly the biblical Jarmuth maybe, and Ibla,
Yeah.
pushing his control up to the Cedar Forest, likely the Amanus Mountains in modern-day Turkey, and up to the Silver Mountain, which is thought to be the Alada, also in Turkey. This essentially gave him a land route spanning from the Mediterranean Sea to the Persian Gulf, facilitating trade and projecting his power across a pretty diverse landscape.
That's an incredible reach for such an early period of empire building. And what about eastward? Did Sargon also engage in military campaigns in that direction?
Indeed. Sargon's inscriptions also proclaim him as king of the world, conqueror of Elam and Pershum, both significant powers located to the east of Mesopotamia. He even names specific rulers he defeated, like Lu'u Ishan, who is the king of Elam, and Sidgau, a prominent general from Pershum.
Right.
These victories secured his eastern flank and brought valuable resources and trade routes under his control.
It sounds like a relentless and highly successful period of expansion. The article mentions he claimed to have been victorious over a total of 34 cities.
That's the number he boasts, yeah. And it underscores the scale of his military achievements and the extent of the territory he brought under his sway. Interestingly, the inscription also notes that ships from distant lands like Maluha, likely the Indus Valley civilization, Magan, possibly Oman, and Dilmun, Bahrain, docked in his capital city of Akkad.
Wow.
This suggests that Akkad was becoming a major international hub for trade and diplomacy under Sargon's rule, further solidifying his power and influence.
And to maintain control over such a widespread domain, he must have needed a substantial and well-organized military force, right?
Absolutely. The Nippur inscription mentions that he maintained a standing army or royal court of 5,400 men who ate bread daily before him. This implies a professional, well-maintained, and loyal military force,
Yeah.
which would have been essential for both his conquests and for maintaining order across his vast territories. It speaks to a level of administrative organization that was quite advanced for the time.
So the Nippur inscription paints a picture of a highly effective and ambitious military leader who forged a vast empire.
Right.
But as we touched on earlier, Sargon's image was also significantly shaped by later legends and literary works. Let's delve into those and see how his story evolves over time.
Right. These later literary compositions offer a fascinating glimpse into how Sargon was remembered and the kinds of narratives that were constructed around his legacy centuries after his actual reign. One important group of texts is known collectively as the Sargon Epos, or Res Gesti Sargonis. These are a set of 4 Babylonian texts that present Sargon not just as a powerful conqueror, but also as a shrewd military commander who sought counsel from his advisors before embarking on his campaigns. This adds a layer of complexity to his character, you know?
It's a more nuanced portrayal than just brute force. It suggests a leader who, while clearly powerful, also understood the value of strategy and maybe even consensus. What kind of stories are found within these texts?
Well, one narrative, titled Sargon the Conquering Hero, unfolds within Sargon's court during a moment of crisis. Sargon rallies his warriors, emphasizing the importance of heroism and valor. Another figure, a courtier, then speaks of the glory that awaits those who achieve victory. Interestingly, one section recounts a campaign to a distant land called Utaraspeshtim, and this account even includes a dramatic darkening of the sun coinciding with the conquest of Simurum, a region that we know was a target of Sargon's military activities based on his year names. The epos concludes with Sargon himself listing his extensive conquests, reinforcing his legendary status.
A darkening of the sun during a military campaign. That's a powerful image. That would undoubtedly be interpreted as a significant omen, maybe even divine intervention. Another text mentioned is the King of Battle. What does that narrative explore?
The King of Battle focuses on a specific campaign led by Sargon into Anatolia, specifically against the city of Purushandha, with the aim of protecting Akkadian merchants who were operating in that region.
Protecting merchants. Interesting motivation.
Yeah. And what makes this text particularly noteworthy is that versions of it have been discovered in both Hittite and Akkadian, indicating its widespread popularity and influence across different cultures. However, it's generally considered anachronistic. Meaning it places Sargon in a historical context more characteristic of the 19th century BC, which is considerably later than his actual lifetime. So while it's not historically accurate in its details, it reveals how later generations envisioned Sargon interacting with the world.
So it's more about the enduring image of Sargon as a powerful protector of Akkadian interests, even if the specific details are embellished or misplaced in time. Did this King of Battle narrative also extend Sargon's reach geographically, perhaps even further westward?
It does indeed. The text mentions that Sargon crossed the Sea of the West, which is generally understood to be the Mediterranean Sea, and reached a place called Kupara. Some scholars have proposed that Kupara might be the Akkadian rendering of Keftiu, an ancient name often associated with Crete or Cyprus.
Crete or Cyprus, wow.
Yeah, it suggests that the legendary accounts of Sargon's achievements expanded his influence far beyond his historically attested conquests, potentially reaching into the Aegean region. It really highlights the power of storytelling and amplifying a ruler's reputation.
That's quite a geographical leap.
Yeah.
From Mesopotamia to possibly Crete, the legend was clearly taking on a life of its own. Now, the Wikipedia article also mentions the Chronicle of Early Kings. What does that particular text contribute to our understanding of Sargon?
The Chronicle of Early Kings offers a broader historical overview that includes an account of Sargon's reign within a larger sequence of Mesopotamian rulers. It notes that in his later years, Sargon faced widespread revolts across his vast empire and was even besieged within his own capital city of Akkad.
Oh, really? So it wasn't all smooth sailing?
Not according to this text, no. However, the chronicle emphasizes his resilience, stating that Sargon personally led his forces out of the city, decisively defeated the rebels, and brought their captured possessions back to Akkad, reaffirming his authority.
So even a figure as powerful as Sargon wasn't immune to internal challenges and uprisings. It wasn't just a story of constant outward expansion.
Precisely. The chronicle also mentions his military engagements with the region of Subartu and claims their submission to his rule. Interestingly, it attributes a subsequent famine and hardship faced by his people to the anger of the god Marduk, suggesting this divine displeasure was a consequence of some unspecified evil committed by Sargon. This intertwining of human actions and divine will is a common thread in ancient Mesopotamian historical narratives.
That's a fascinating way to explain periods of hardship, attributing them to divine judgment. What else does the Chronicle of Early Kings tell us about Sargon's overall impact?
It makes some very grand pronouncements about his reign, stating that Sargon had neither rival nor equal, and that his splendor extended throughout all the lands. It claims that in his 11th year of rule, he conquered the Western territories to their furthest extent, unified them under his authority, and even erected his royal statues in those distant lands as symbols of his power.
Okay.
The chronicle also describes the transportation of captured wealth from the west via barges and the establishment of his royal officials at strategic intervals to govern the diverse tribes in a unified manner. Furthermore, it recounts his conquest of 4 prominent rulers of Elam, effectively making them vassals of Akkad. These claims really solidified the image of Sargon as a ruler of unparalleled power and ambition in the eyes of later Mesopotamian scribes.
These later texts certainly elevate Sargon to almost mythical proportions, a ruler whose power and influence stretched to the very edges of the known world. It's remarkable to see this legendary layer being built upon the foundations of the historical figure. And speaking of foundational stories, Sargon's own origin narrative is quite extraordinary, isn't it? The article details both a Sumerian and a later Assyrian version of his birth.
Yes, the origin legends are particularly captivating and provide valuable insights into how Sargon's seemingly improbable rise to power and his subsequent legitimacy were explained and, well, embellished over the centuries. The Sumerian legend, which was discovered in Nippur and represents an older tradition compared to the Assyrian version,
Right.
it identifies his father as Libum, Following a break in the text, the narrative shifts its focus to Sargon in his role as a cupbearer to Ur-Zababa, the king of Kish, a recurring motif in his early life narrative.
A cupbearer again. It seems this role was significant in the early narratives surrounding him. What unfolds in this Sumerian version of the origin story?
The legend recounts a series of dreams involving the goddess Inanna and ominous predictions regarding the downfall of Ur-Zababa at the hands of Sargon. Understandably alarmed by these portents, Ur-Zababa orders Sargon's assassination, but the goddess Inanna intervenes to protect him.
Divine intervention.
Exactly. Later in the fragment, Ur-Zababa sends Sargon on a mission to Lugalzajsi, entrusting him with a clay tablet that secretly instructs Lugalzajsi to kill Sargon. Unfortunately, the surviving portion of the legend breaks off at this critical juncture just before Sargon's own ascent to the kingship.
Ah, cliffhanger.
Yeah. So, while we don't get the full picture of his rise in this version, it clearly establishes a narrative of divine favor and political intrigue surrounding his early life.
So even in this older Sumerian version, we see the seeds of a remarkable story, divine protection and betrayal, setting the stage for his eventual rise. The article also points out interesting parallels to other well-known stories, like Joseph, Bellerophon, and Uriah. What are those connections?
Exactly. The element of dream interpretation and its political ramifications echoes the biblical story of Joseph in Egypt. The motif of a messenger unknowingly carrying a decree for their own demise is reminiscent of the Greek myth of Bellerophon and the biblical tale of Uriah.
Right.
These recurring narrative patterns across different ancient cultures suggest shared ways of understanding fate and power dynamics. It's quite fascinating.
Now, the other origin legend is the Neo-Assyrian birth legend. This one is perhaps even more dramatic and focuses on the very beginning of Sargon's life.
It is indeed. This version, which dates to the 7th century BC, presents itself as Sargon's own autobiography. It claims that he was the illegitimate son of a high priestess and that his father's identity was unknown.
Okay.
He was born in Azupiranu, a settlement located on the banks of the Euphrates River. To conceal his birth and protect him, his mother placed him in a carefully sealed reed basket coated with bitumen and cast him adrift on the river.
That sounds strikingly similar to the story of Moses in the Bible. The parallels are hard to ignore even from that brief description.
The similarities are quite remarkable, yeah, and have been widely noted by scholars. The river journey led him to Aki, a humble water drawer, who rescued the infant, raised him as his own son, and eventually appointed him as a gardener.
The gardener again.
Gardener again. The legend then recounts that while working as a gardener, the goddess Ishtar bestowed her love upon him, and it was through her favor that he ultimately attained kingship and ruled for many years.
This narrative of a hidden or humble beginning, followed by divine favor and a sudden elevation to power, is such a classic trope in heroic biographies across many cultures. The article mentions Otto Rank's work, The Myth of the Birth of the Hero, exploring these patterns in figures like Sargon, Moses, Karna, Oedipus.
Exactly.
It really speaks to a fundamental human fascination with the idea of greatness emerging from obscurity.
That's a crucial point. These birth exposure myths often serve to emphasize the extraordinary destiny and inherent greatness of the hero, suggesting they were marked for exceptional things from the very start. As the article notes, the specific parallels with the birth of Moses have been explored in detail by scholars like Lewis. Some have even proposed that the Sargon birth legend might have served as an inspiration for the biblical figure of Nimrod, given his association with the unification of Babylonia and this, dramatic origin story.
It's incredible how these ancient stories continue to resonate and connect across different cultures and time periods. Let's shift our focus slightly and talk about Sargon's family. We know some of their names and roles, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Right.
We know that his principal wife was Queen Tashlutum, and several of his children are also recorded in historical texts. Perhaps the most famous is his daughter Enheduanna,
Right, and had one.
who served as the high priestess of the moon god Nana in the city of Ur. She was also a highly significant literary figure in her own right, credited with composing a number of important ritual hymns, including the celebrated exaltation of Inanna, which continued to be used for centuries after her lifetime.
And Hadwana, a princess, who was also a poet and a powerful religious figure. That really adds another fascinating layer to the Sargonic dynasty, suggesting a culture that valued both political and artistic expression. And Sargon also had sons who followed him as rulers, right?
Correct. Sargon was initially succeeded by his son Rimush. Following Rimush's death, another son, Manishtushu, ascended to the throne. Manishtushu, in turn, was later succeeded by his own son, Naram-Sin, who also became a very powerful and well-known ruler of the Akkadian Empire.
Marvin, yeah, another big name.
Definitely. We also have records of two other sons, Shu-Enlil, who is also sometimes referred to as Ibarum, and Ilabais-Takal, also known as Abais-Takal. The fact that he established a line of succession indicates his intention to create a lasting political entity beyond his own lifetime.
So he not only built an empire, but also laid the foundations for a dynasty that continued to rule for a significant period after his death. This naturally leads us to consider his lasting legacy and overall influence on the ancient world. Why is Sargon of Akkad still considered such an important figure in history?
Well, Sargon of Akkad holds a really significant place in history, often identified as the first ruler in recorded history to effectively govern what we would recognize as an empire, basically, a centralized state ruling over a diverse array of peoples and territories.
Right.
While earlier Sumerian rulers like Lugalzajsi might have had similar ambitions and some level of regional control, Sargon's achievements seem to have been more extensive in scale and had a more profound and lasting impact on the political landscape of the ancient Near East.
Okay.
His reign essentially marks the beginning of the era of Semitic empires in the region, a period that would last for nearly 15 centuries, interrupted only by the brief resurgence of Sumerian power during the Third Dynasty of Ur.
That's a massive historical shadow he casts, essentially ushering in a new era of political organization in the region. The article also mentions that he was regarded as a model for Mesopotamian kings for millennia after his death. That's a powerful form of influence.
Absolutely. Assyrian and Babylonian kings centuries later consciously presented themselves as the heirs to Sargon's imperial legacy and looked back to his reign as a kind of golden age of powerful rule. He may very well have introduced the very concept of empire, as it was later understood, particularly in the Assyrian period. There's even a Neo-Assyrian text known as the Sargon text, where Sargon is presented as speaking in the first person, challenging later rulers to govern Mesopotamia with the same effectiveness and authority that he had demonstrated.
So he became a standard against which later rulers measured their own power and legitimacy. And it seems his fame and influence even extended beyond Mesopotamia itself.
Yes, remarkably. A Middle Hittite record of a Hurro-Hittite song dating back to the 15th century BC invokes Sargon and his immediate successors as deified kings. This indicates that his legendary status had spread into Anatolia quite early on, suggesting the impact of his conquests and the stories surrounding them resonated across a wide geographical area.
And as we discussed earlier with the evolution of his name, his memory was kept alive through later kings who deliberately adopted his name as a way to associate themselves with his power and prestige.
Precisely. We see this with Sargon I of the Old Assyrian period, who was undoubtedly named in his honor. And of course with the Neo-Assyrian king Sargon II, the figure mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, and from whom our modern spelling of Sargon originates.
Right.
Even as late as the Neo-Babylonian period, King Nabonidus showed a keen interest in the Sargonid dynasty, conducting archaeological investigations of their palaces in a conscious effort to connect with that distant imperial past.
It's truly fascinating to think about rulers from thousands of years later actively looking back and studying Sargon's reign. Now, for a bit of a change of pace, the article also touches on Sargon's appearances in popular culture, which are quite diverse and sometimes unexpected.
They certainly are. His image has been interpreted in some rather creative ways in modern media. For example, in the film The Scorpion King, Rise of a Warrior, he's portrayed as a villainous army commander who employs black magic.
Black magic, okay.
Yeah, it's a far cry from the historical and legendary accounts, but it shows how his name still carries a certain weight associated with ancient power.
Definitely a Hollywood spin on ancient history. What are some of the other interesting ways he's popped up in popular culture?
Well, in the original Star Trek television series, there was a highly advanced telepathic alien being named Sargon, who was the last survivor of a once mighty interstellar empire. So his name has become synonymous with powerful ancient rulers, even in the realm of science fiction.
From ancient Mesopotamia to the final frontier of space. That's quite a journey for his name to take.
It is. There's also a reference to him in the They Might Be Giants song, The Mesopotamians, where he's listed alongside other iconic figures like Hammurabi and Gilgamesh, demonstrating his continued presence in the popular imagination as a key figure from that ancient era. More recently, Carl Benjamin, a British YouTuber, adopted Sargon of Akkad as his online pseudonym, further embedding the name in contemporary discourse, though perhaps controversially for some.
A rather surprising and modern connection indeed.
Hmm.
And for those interested in gaming, Sargon is also featured prominently in the Sargon of Akkad campaign within the Return of Rome expansion for Age of Empires II, Definitive Edition,
Yes.
allowing players to recreate his legendary conquests in a virtual setting. This speaks to the enduring appeal of his story and the desire to engage with his historical legacy in different ways.
Yes, he continues to be a figure that captures the imagination and remains relevant in a variety of modern contexts, clearly.
One final point from the article that I found particularly interesting was the discussion surrounding the so-called Mask of Sargon. Despite its traditional name, current scholarly consensus suggests that it is more likely a representation of his grandson, Naram-Sin, based on stylistic analysis.
That's correct. Despite its long-standing association with Sargon, the iconic bronze head is now widely believed to depict Naram-Sin rather than Sargon himself. It serves as a valuable reminder that even seemingly definitive archaeological discoveries can be subject to reinterpretation and revision as our understanding of the past evolves with new evidence and analytical techniques.
Well, you and I have certainly taken a deep dive into a distant past today, exploring the life, reign, and enduring legacy of Sargon of Akkad.
We have indeed. We've journeyed through his rise to power, examined the scope of his military achievements that laid the groundwork for one of the earliest empires in recorded history, and explored the fascinating interplay of historical accounts and the rich tapestry of legendary tales that have grown around his name over the past 4 millennia.
From the carefully chosen meaning embedded in his Akkadian name, to the echoes of his reign found in ancient literature, and even his surprising appearances in our modern popular culture, Sargon's impact clearly resonates across vast stretches of time.
And as you consider this intricate weaving together of historical facts and the powerful birth and heroic legends associated with him, it really prompts you to think. How much of our understanding of even the most pivotal figures in history is ultimately shaped not only by what they demonstrably did, but also by the stories that we continue to tell and retell about them?
Good question.
What aspects of Sargon's true legacy might be forever intertwined with carefully crafted narratives that were perhaps designed to legitimize his rule, inspire future generations, and solidify his place in the historical record? This deep dive, I hope, has provided you with a solid foundation for understanding this truly complex and influential figure. But as you can see, it only scratches the surface of a story that continues to fascinate and provoke thought. So, have you ever wondered, what if humanity was on the brink of annihilation? Facing an alien invasion, and our only hope was a group of, incredibly gifted kids trained to be military strategists.
Well, that's the fascinating premise behind Ender's Game, right?
Yeah, exactly. Ender's Game. It's a whole series, actually, and it's really captured people's imaginations. And I know a lot of you have been asking us to do a deep dive on it, and we get it. It's a cool concept, this whole idea of child soldiers fighting off alien invaders. It pulls you in.
It really does. And when you start digging deeper, it becomes clear that Ender's Game is so much more than just that initial conflict. For this deep dive, we went through a ton of material. Like, the Wikipedia page is super comprehensive. It's amazing how much detail there is. It's like you realize there's this whole universe built around this story.
Totally. And it's not just one book either, right?
Oh, no, not at all.
There are all these spin-offs and prequels and sequels, and it can be a little overwhelming trying to figure out where to start. What's connected to what.
It definitely can be.
So our mission today is to kind of unpack this whole Ender's Game saga for you. We're going to explore the different subseries. We'll talk about those, the aliens, the Formex, and we'll look at how the story has been told, in books, comics, even film adaptation. We want to give you those aha moments where you're like, oh, that's how it all fits together, without drowning you in information.
Right, right.
So let's start at the very beginning. What's the origin story of Ender's Game?
Okay, so the original Ender's Game was actually a novelette, a shorter piece.
Yeah.
And then Orson Scott Card, the author, he expanded it into a full-fledged novel, and that's the one that really blew up. It won all the awards.
Hugo Award.
Yeah, the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award.
Wow.
That's a pretty big deal in science fiction. It's like the Oscars.
Huge. And then the sequel, Speaker for the Dead, did the same thing.
Yeah, it won both awards too. which is, like, incredibly rare.
So it's safe to say the series had a pretty strong start.
Definitely.
So for those who maybe haven't read the books yet, who is Ender? And what's this battle school all about?
Well, Ender Wiggin is, he's this incredibly gifted child. He's like a prodigy, a tactical genius. And Battle School is where they take these gifted kids and train them to, basically be the commanders in the war against the Formics. It's intense.
It's gotta be, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're taking these young kids and putting them through these, like, rigorous simulations and war games.
Oh, absolutely. It's like they're being groomed to be leaders, to think strategically, make tough decisions under incredible pressure, and they're like surrounded by this constant threat of another Formic invasion. So it's high stakes all the time.
And that's really the focus of the early part of the series, right?
Right.
The military aspect, the war.
Yeah, but what's really cool is that the series doesn't stay there. As you go into the later Ender books, like Speaker for the Dead, Xenocide, Children of the Mind, it starts to shift. It becomes much more philosophical, introspective.
Well, it goes from this, like, action-packed space opera to something a little more thoughtful.
Exactly. It starts exploring these big ideas like the nature of humanity, the ethics of war, our relationship with alien life. Ender, he's dealing with the weight of his actions in the war because he doesn't know it at the time, but he actually commits genocide.
Yeah.
And he spends a lot of time trying to find redemption to prevent that from happening again.
So there's this whole, like, moral complexity that emerges, right? It's not just about good versus evil anymore.
Right.
And it's not just the core Ender books either. There are these other stories, like the novella A War of Gifts, an Ender story. What's that about?
Oh, yeah. So A War of Gifts takes place during Ender's first year at Battle School.
Yeah.
So it kind of runs parallel to the main story. And it's more about like the interpersonal stuff. It shows us the culture of Battle School from a slightly different angle.
Interesting.
Yeah, like there's this whole subplot about Ender's sort of active rebellion, and it explores his relationship with religion and how he navigates this intense environment.
And then there's Ender in Exile. Now, where does that fit in?
Ender in Exile is tricky. It's kind of a sequel to Ender's Game and a prequel to Speaker for the Dead.
Okay.
It follows Ender as he goes to this new human colony on a former Formic planet. And Orson Scott Card actually uses it to like rewrite parts of the original Ender's Game ending, which is interesting.
So it's kind of like a bridge between the early, more action-oriented stories and the later, more philosophical ones.
Yeah, you could say that.
Mm.
It also introduces some characters that become important in the Shadow Saga.
Ah, okay. So let's talk about the Shadow Saga. Now, this is a whole separate series, right?
Yeah, sometimes it's called the Shadow Quintet because it's 5 books.
5 books, and what's the focus here?
So the Shadow Saga follows the characters that were left behind on Earth after Ender leaves.
Okay.
And the cool thing is the first book, Ender's Shadow, actually takes place at the same time as Ender's Game. But it's told from the perspective of Bean, Ender's, like his brilliant second-in-command at Battle School.
Right, right.
So you get to see all those same events unfold, but from a completely different point of view, which is like really fascinating. It shows you how perspective can totally change your understanding of a story.
Bean was such a cool character, and I bet it's really insightful to see how he experiences things differently.
Oh, definitely. And then this series goes on to explore what happens after the war with the Formics.
Yeah.
Shadow of the Hegemon, Shadow Puppet, Shadow the Giant, they all deal with the power struggles on Earth. The old Battle School kids like Peter Wiggin, Petra Arcanian, they're all involved in these like intense political conflicts.
So while Ender's out there exploring the galaxy, there's this whole other drama playing out back home.
Exactly. And it's like, it's a different kind of conflict. It's more about politics, manipulation, global strategy. And then there's this novella, Shadows in Flight, which introduces Bean's kids, who are like super intelligent, but also have these physical challenges because of this genetic anomaly called Anton's Key.
So it's like the next generation facing its own unique set of problems.
Yeah, you can see it that way. And then finally, there's The Last Shadow, which was published relatively recently.
And what does that one do?
Well, it's meant to be the conclusion of both the Ender Saga and the Shadow Saga. So it picks up after Children of the Mind and Shadows in Flight, and it ties up all the loose ends.
So it's like the grand finale of the whole Enderverse.
Pretty much.
Wow, it's amazing how much this story has grown and branched out. But it doesn't stop there, right? There's the Formic Wars trilogy, which takes us even further back in time.
Exactly. The Formic Wars trilogy, that's Earth Unaware, Earth of Fire, and Earth Awakens, those books actually take place before all the others.
Okay.
So we see the very first contact between humans and the Formics, and how that initial encounter escalates into this, like, full-blown interstellar war.
So it's like the prequel to the prequels almost.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you could say that. We get to see the events that shaped the world Ender was born into.
And it gets even more complicated because there's a second Formic War trilogy in the works, too.
Right. Orson Scott Card and Aaron Johnston are writing that one together. The first two books, The Swarm and the Hive, are already out, and they continue the stories of some characters we saw in the Formic Wars trilogy, like Victor Delgado, Misa Rackham, Bingwin.
So the backstory just keeps expanding. It's like peeling back the layers of history.
Yeah, exactly.
And then just when you think you've got it all figured out, there's another series that pops up, the Fleet School series. What's that one all about?
So Fleet School is a newer series. It's targeted at a younger audience. And the idea is that, after the war with the Formics is over, Battle School needs a new purpose, so it gets repurposed as Fleet School. They train young people to be like commanders and explorers for these new human colonies that are being established on other planets.
So it's taking those same principles of strategic thinking and leadership that were developed at Battle School and applying them to like space exploration and colonization.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how even after the main threat is gone, those skills are still so valuable. And when you look at it all together, it's remarkable how much material there is in the Enderverse.
Oh, yeah. According to our sources, there are like 19 novels, 13 short stories, 47 comic issues, an audio play, and a film.
Wow, that's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, it's a whole expanded universe.
And then there's the short story collection, First Meetings. What's included in that?
First Meetings has stories from all over the timeline, like some are set before Ender's Game, some are set after Shadows in Flight. They kind of fill in the gaps, give you little glimpses into different parts of the history.
Ah, cool. So it's like bonus content for the super fans?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then there are the comic book adaptations from Marvel Comics, which are, they're pretty cool. It's interesting to see the stories translated into a visual medium.
Yeah, you get to see all the characters and the action come to life.
Right.
There was also a video game in development at one point, Ender's Game, Battle Room, but it never got released.
Yeah, that's a bummer. It was supposed to focus on the Battle Room, which is like the zero-gravity combat training area in Battle School. There were even talks about a more traditional Ender's Game video game, based on the novel, but that never happened either.
Oh, that would have been awesome. Maybe someday. But there is a Japanese manga adaptation, Ender No Game, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that shows how popular the series is internationally. And of course, there's the Ender's Game movie.
Right, the movie. So how did that turn out?
It was, it was okay. It followed the basic plot of the first book, and the actors were good. Harrison Ford played Colonel Graff.
Yeah.
And Asa Butterfield played Ender. But, it's a complex story, and trying to fit it all into one movie, it lost some of the nuance.
Right. Some things inevitably get left out when you're adapting a book to film.
Definitely.
But for those who are really into the Enderverse, there are some great companion books out there, like the Authorized Ender Companion, which is basically like an encyclopedia of the series.
Yeah, it's got all kinds of information about the characters, the history, the technology. And then there's Ender's World. Fresh perspectives on the SF classic Ender's Game, which is a collection of essays about the first novel, different analyses and interpretations.
So there's definitely a lot to dig into for those who want to go deep.
Yeah, there's no shortage of material.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the different series and the story, but let's talk about the Formics themselves. Who are these aliens that humanity is so afraid of?
Right. So at the beginning, in Ender's Game, the Formics are presented as like this terrifying, aggressive alien force. They attacked Earth 50 years before the story starts, and they almost wiped us out.
And they look like insects, right?
Yeah, kind of. They're described as being ant-like or maybe like some kind of beetle, and they're completely alien in their behavior and their way of thinking.
So the initial understanding is that they're just these ruthless invaders who want to destroy humanity.
Right, and Misa Rackham is the hero who, like, single-handedly stopped them.
The legendary Misa Rackham.
Yeah. But as the series goes on, we learn that it's not that simple. Yeah, it turns out that the first attack wasn't deliberate, at least not in the way humans understand it. The Formics, they operate under a hive mind. They're all connected. And because of that, they didn't see individual humans as being truly sentient. It was like a miscommunication, a tragic misunderstanding that led to this devastating war.
Wow, that's a huge revelation. It completely changes how you view the whole conflict.
Right. And the way they're referred to also changes over time, which is interesting. The term formic is more scientific, it comes from the Latin word for ant. But The humans also call them buggers, which is obviously a derogatory term.
Like a slur, almost.
Yeah. And you see this shift in the books, like Valentine, she used buggers in Ender's Game, but then in Ender in Exile, which takes place later, she uses formics. And then in Speaker for the Dead, she's back to using buggers.
Interesting. So it's not just a matter of the author's preference, it's actually reflecting the changing attitudes of the characters.
Yeah, I think so. And the film only uses formics, which is probably a deliberate choice, to avoid using the more offensive term.
Right, right. And the Formics have this very specific social structure, right? They're hive-minded with a queen controlling everything.
Exactly. Each formic colony has a queen, and she's the one who, directs all the workers.
Mm.
And in the early books, we're led to believe that if the queen dies, all the workers die too, like they're instantly brain dead. But then in Xenocide, it's hinted that the workers might be able to break free from the queen's control under certain circumstances.
So it's not as black and white as we initially thought.
Right. And then in Shadows in Flight, we learned that there are actually 3 types of formics: drones, workers, and queens. The drones are small and physically attached to the queen. The workers do the labor, the building, the fighting, and the queens are the ones who communicate and make the decisions.
So there's this whole hierarchy, a division of labor within the hive.
Yeah, and it's much more complex than just a bunch of mindless insects following orders.
And their environment is also very different from ours, right? They live mostly underground in these dark colonies.
Right, and they seem to rely on senses other than sight. There's a mention of artificial lighting in their colonies in the first book, but later in Xenocide, it's suggested that they actually use heat signatures and other non-visual cues to navigate.
So it's like a totally different way of perceiving the world.
Totally.
Okay, so for you, the learner, we've just taken you on a whirlwind tour of the Enderverse. It's a vast and complex series that goes way beyond just a story about kids fighting aliens. It's a story about war, ethics, understanding, and the consequences of our actions.
And one of the biggest takeaways, I think, is that the formics, the supposed enemy, are actually victims of a tragic misunderstanding. They're not the monsters we initially thought they were.
Which raises some really interesting questions about how we define enemy and how easy it is to misinterpret the actions of those who are different from us. So if you're interested in exploring the Enderverse further, there are a few ways you can approach it. You could read the books in chronological order, starting with the Formic Wars trilogy, or you could follow the publication order. Orson Scott Card actually recommends reading Xenocide before Children of the Mind, which is a little out of order, but it apparently makes more sense thematically.
And don't forget the Shadow Saga, which runs parallel to the main Ender story. It offers a whole new perspective on the events.
It's really up to you how you want to experience it, but no matter what order you choose, the Enderverse is full of surprises, thought-provoking ideas, and compelling characters.
And it leaves you with a lot to think about. Given that the war with the Formics started because of a misunderstanding, how do we justify the actions that followed? Was Ender's victory truly a victory, or was it just another tragedy in a long line of tragedies?
And how can we avoid making similar mistakes in the future when we encounter other intelligent species, out there in the vastness of space?
It's something to ponder, isn't it? The ethics of first contact, the potential for both wonder and destruction. It's what makes the Ender's Game series so relevant, even decades after it was first published.
Definitely food for thought.
Lots of it.